Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, welcome to another edition of the Professor Game Podcast. And today we have a very special guest. But Adrian, before we get started, are you prepared to engage?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Let's do this. It's Adrian Hon. He is the co-founder and CEO at 6 to Start. They are the creators of gamelike stories and story-like games, including the world's best-selling smartphone fitness games, Zombies Run, with 4 million players. Their clients have included Disney, the BBC, Channel 4, and Penguin, and the company has won multiple awards, including Best of Show at South by Southwest. He's an author of A History of the Fortune in 100 Objects. He has spoken at the flagship TED conference, The Long Now, Google, and Mozilla. He has written a column about technology for the Telegraph, and he was originally trained as a neuroscientist at Cambridge, UCSD, and Oxford. Is there anything from that intro, Adrian, that we're missing?
That's a lot, but I think that covers the highlights, yeah.
Fantastic. So, Adrian, we always like to get to know our guests a bit more, and we'd like to know, whether it's in these times of pandemic, pre that, or what you're planning to your days to be after this whole thing goes on. What is a day, a week? How does your being Adrian Hon in a day like today work?
Well, 6 to Start has been a fully remote company for a couple of years, actually. So, going into lockdown, it didn't really change my day-to-day routine, at least work-wise. I work from home, and we have staff around the world, in Japan, Australia, America, across Europe. And so, my day on the face of it looks, the same now as it did 6 months ago, which is to say, I'll get up, get on to company team systems like Slack and Notion and Google Docs and so on around 9, check up on what people have been up to. And some people will have already been working for a few hours at that point. So I want to make sure that they have what they need. Then, checking through social media, checking through our support and our sort of analytics for Zombies Run. There's hundreds of thousands of people playing. And so, we just want to make sure that's all looking healthy. And then, obviously making sure that people in the company have what they need. I think one of the main roles of running a company and being a producer is making sure that, the staff have everything they need to execute really well. And I think that a lot of people, sort of think that when you're a manager, you have people working for you, which is true, but you're also working for them. And that's how, great teams work. And so that's really important to me. So a lot of communication in that way. And, if there's any time left, then I'll be doing my own work as well. So that's what my day looks like. And I really try and sort of stick to actually a 9 to 5. There are a lot of people who work longer hours. I used to work longer hours. But I find that if you want to keep this sort of thing sustainable, then you need to be pretty strict about a work-life balance.
Absolutely. And there's times for everything, I guess, that there's people who are more sort of, you can call it the hustle stage, or you're still at the stage where you're doing, like I can tell you, I have as though I had multiple jobs. I'm working, I'm teaching, I'm doing the podcast and related issues. So for me, it's a bit more crazy, but I try to do the sort of, I block it out, and that makes a lot of sense as far as it is possible. And I do agree with you completely that, sort of fixing that time that you're going to work doesn't mean you're working less. It actually sort of forces you into being productive enough to make all the things that you need to get done. So I like that philosophy. Absolutely. And Adrian, we would like to know of a story of a time when, you set out to do something using these story games or these game stories. And, you tried to do this. It didn't go the way you wanted it to. Sort of things sort of went south. And what did you do about it? How did you come out of it? We want to hear the story. We want to be there with you to feel that.
Well, 6 to Start, we used to be more of a digital agency. We would do work for clients, and, that would be like consulting work or even developing apps or games or that sort of thing. And some of those were award-winning, and some of those were good or okay, and some of those were, close to being catastrophically bad. And those are very rare occasions, thankfully. In the cases where things went really wrong, then we tried to be as honest as possible with the people we're working with and saying, okay, well, here's what's gone wrong. Here's how we think we can fix it. And, obviously, I don't really want to, get bogged down in sort of recrimination, I guess, when something goes wrong. There's not really a lot of point in assigning blame if something's gone wrong that's affecting a lot of people. It's really, I'm very much focused on how do we fix things and limit the damage. Back when we launched Zombies Run, we funded it on Kickstarter and we pre-sold copies of the app. And the idea would be that if you were a backer on Kickstarter, then you would receive a special code. And if you use that code on our free app in Zombies Run from the App Store, then you would unlock the app. So the funny thing is, we talked to someone at Apple beforehand and checked whether this would be okay. And they said, yes, in writing. And a couple of months after Zombies Run came out, I got a call from someone at Apple saying, what you're doing, that's against terms of service. You can't do that. And I said, okay. Now, you never want to receive a call from Apple. I think I've had a number of calls from Apple. Only one of them has been good. The rest have been bad. So you just don't really want to hear from them. And they said, you can't do that. You're going to have to stop doing it. And I said, well, you told us that this would be okay. And anyway, they sort of went quiet for a bit, and I could tell they were sort of investigating on their end. And that person who told us it would be okay, apparently not really in a position to say that. And so they said, okay, well, it's been a misunderstanding, but you still have to stop doing that. And we had to email, 3,500 of our backers on Kickstarter and say, well, long story short, you're going to have to rebuy Zombies Run, basically. This thing that you thought you paid for, you get to buy it. And we discounted it to like $1 or something. And we said, we're really sorry about this, but here's how we're going to do it. And we're going to give you like a voucher and try and make it good. And people were very understanding. I mean, in that case, they sort of knew it wasn't our fault. It was just like Apple's fault, basically. But there was a moment, there where we just thought, well, this is the end. This is going to be a huge, huge problem. And so, that problem did not stop Zombies Run from being a popular product or a successful product, but it was something that we had to kind of act very quickly about and to communicate really clearly about as well, and to make sure our players felt happy about what we're doing.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that, given the success that you've had after that, there's many lessons you took from that situation. Is there anything that you would have done maybe differently, of course, not knowing that what the end result was, but that there was a risk of this? Is there anything you would have tried to do differently, maybe on the initial communication? Like what was the lesson that you took away from that?
I don't think I would have done anything differently, but I would have reacted differently, which is to say we have throughout the years, and even, very recently, we've had problems in things we've done that affect our customers, that affect our players, right? And now that I've been, running a company for, 13 years, and Zombies Run has been out for like 8 or 9 years, you just are able to sort of have a bit more perspective on this stuff. Right? Which is to say, you can have a very bad day and you can have a very bad week, but it's still not the end of the world. And there's no point catastrophizing. And I think one of the things I've been able to do for the team is to say, look, this feels bad and it is bad right now, but you should have seen what it was like 5 years ago. Your hair would be on fire. So, we've been in much stickier situations. And if it happened again now, I'd be like, well, this is bad, but we're going to get through it because we've always gotten through it.
There you go. That resilience. And, especially in these times where we're going through all the difficulties that many people personally and financially are going through, I especially like that message right now. And shifting gears here and going actually for a situation where you faced a big challenge. And of course, you used all these strategies, all these lessons that you've taken, and, you solved it using these game stories, these story-like games as well. How did you do it? Like, what would you attribute at least a part of that success to?
You mean Zombies Run? What is the sort of lies behind success there, or sort of?
Yeah, it could be Zombies Run or any other story. Again, I know you have clients who have NDAs and so on, but whatever you can reveal is fantastic.
The thing that I've always been really focused on when it comes to designing games is just trying to think very hard about what people will be doing with it and whether it's going to be useful. And that sounds, I don't know, that sounds kind of like trite. But I guess, again, well, to take Zombies Run, it's a most successful game. We are not the first people to have come up with a running game on smartphones. There were like a few before us, not hundreds, but a few. And if you look at them, if you look at the screenshots, some of them still look pretty cool now. They have like a top-down view of a map, and they have treasure that you go and run over the treasure to pick it up. And it's GPS based and location based. And you look at that, and you think, wow, that's kind of even more sophisticated in some ways than Zombies Run. And I played all these. I think it's important to play, and to do your research and to look at the competition. And I thought, I'm never going to use this more than once, because if you are a runner, you don't want to be looking at your phone when you're running, right? Just full stop. Like, runners do not look at their phones when they're running. You can just go outside to a park and you can just watch people, and they're not looking at their phones. Walkers, maybe, yeah, but not runners, because people have their routes. And so I think that one of the things that has been helpful for me is that we use game mechanics, and we use games, and we use stories to create these things that help people do what they want to do. But my primary identity is not a gamer, right? And I think this is a problem for a lot of game designers, where they kind of think that everything should be a game, and more game mechanics are good, and that everyone would be a gamer if only they had a chance. If you are in that kind of mindset, then having a running game where you're looking at a map on your phone and you're sort of dodging around invisible like zombies and picking up treasure down shady alleyways that you normally wouldn't go down, then you probably think, wow, this is like a really fun game. But if you're just like a runner, you think, I just don't want to go down that dodgy alleyway, right? And so I think it's a really important skill to be able to put yourself in the shoes of, not necessarily normal people, but of people who you want to, maybe someone who's a little bit less fanatical about whatever it is that you're doing, and think, okay, well, how can I ease them into this? That's my, that's one of the things that's always been really helpful for me.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And would you say that the difference for you, at least, of course, in your experience, from Zombies Run to many of these other game running apps, would you say it's a sort of attributable, at least a big part of it, to that mindset, to thinking about this differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've met a lot of great designers out there, and we've competed against them, with our games or in our pitches for funding, and they want to come up with something that sounds really good, in bullet points or on a description or on a press release. And I'm kind of like, now that's important. Like, you need to be able to sell the game, right? It needs to sound cool, but it's more important that the game is actually good, and I think that people like really like lose sight of that. I remember I first got into gaming through alternate reality games. That was sort of the first game that I got paid to make. And that was really fun, and alternate reality games are becoming kind of fashionable now, mostly because of bad reasons like QAnon and conspiracy theories. But anyway, alternate reality games are really fascinating because they sort of feel immersive, and they sort of take over the world and take over the internet. But one of the problems is that they can be quite hard to get into, they're quite opaque, quite hard to explain to people. And so after I finished making an alternate reality game, I wanted to do something the complete opposite, which was like something that would be fun, like 5 seconds after you start playing, 30 seconds after you start playing, 3 minutes after you start playing. And I think that's something that is just a really kind of, not every game that we've done is like that, but I think it's a really interesting kind of like prism through which to think about games, right? There's no reason why a game couldn't be fun 3 seconds after you start playing, after you tap on the icon. Like, you could do that. It's a bit harder, but I think that's what games are meant to be. They're meant to be fun. And I think a lot of people get a little bit carried away with technology.
Absolutely. And you've been talking partially about this, but when you're going to design one of these games that you create, do you have some sort of process? I don't know, whether it's I don't know how do you do it, if it's a brainstorm or whatever. When you're going to create a game, like, what goes through your mind? Who do you meet? Like, what do you do when you're going to face one of these challenges?
So this is, I mean, your mileage may vary, right? Right. I don't have a process at all. I don't do any brainstorming. I don't have any charts or anything. We don't do brainstorming meetings. We'll talk about it. And people who know me will know that I come up with some new game idea approximately 2 to 3 times a year. It's usually clockwork. And I fall in love with it. I'm like, this is going to be the best game ever. We should drop everything now and just make this game. It's going to be amazing. And I'll write up 2,000 words on it, and I'll play all these different games, and I'll think about it. And I'll be like, you know what? I'm not that interested. We'll move on to the next thing. Right. And I love just talking to people about it. And I love exploring what it can be. And I love thinking about, okay, what kind of technologies we would use in making it. Right. How pragmatic could it be? Because, ultimately it needs to sort of achieve some goals. And that doesn't necessarily need to be making money. Maybe we just learn something from it, but we want it to be successful in some ways. And I don't know, I think for me personally, it's, I've never, I think a lot of people want there to be a lot of structure around how they come up with ideas. And that's not something that I've found to be terribly useful myself. And that's not to say it would be useful for other people, but I think there's a bit of a fetishization of a process of coming up with ideas. And I just think that if you look at the sort of wider world of how people come up with ideas for books, for movies, for games, for any kind of creative work, there's a much wider diversity of ways in which people do that. And there are probably some amazing games, some amazing movies that come out of that come out of traditional brainstorming sessions or I don't know, wearing different hats, Edward de Bono, all these things that people like doing. And there are other people who just shut themselves up, in an attic for 2 weeks, and they come out and here's a design document, and then we're just going to use that, right? You should do what you enjoy. You should do what works for you. But
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. So it's interesting, and I agree that there's different ways, and that's one of the reasons I like to make this question of how do people come up with these game ideas. And I've found that absolutely, there's many different ways, traditional, non-traditional, just sit down and think. It's interesting if of course, and I've done this with different types of profiles personally and in the podcast, but it's interesting that sometimes you see people and say, oh no, I don't have any sort of process. And in fact, I think it was David Mullick some while ago, a game designer, and he said, well, I had been doing this for 30 years. And I approached this person, and they showed me their sort of process, to design games and so on. And I realized that's exactly what I do, and I had never thought about it. Again, it's not structured; it's just something that comes naturally to people. So I love your comment in that sense, because it shows that, there's some naturality for many people. There's all the experience and the baggage that you have is brought into that design process. And of course, there's sometimes, just the muse comes in and you start creating things and then validating and play testing and taking a look at other users and so on. But, that's part of what we want to find out. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. So Adrian, is there, you've mentioned many, many, many good advice for during this episode, but is there any sort of best practice or something that you would say, well, when you're creating a game, think of this and, you'll probably have better chances of success?
I don't know that I have a kind of number one rule, and, we have as many misses as we do hits, at Six to Start. We made some really successful things. I don't know. I think that our best games have come out of really simple ideas, right? That you can just describe in about one sentence. And I remember really hating that sort of process of coming up with an elevator pitch, because I always used to think, hey, I'm complex, and my ideas are complex, and I can't sum them up in one sentence.
I'm an interesting person.
and I'm kind of and then I realized, but it turns out that usually the best ideas, even the complex ones, can in fact be summed up in about one sentence. And you sort of have to kind of feel confident in that. And, that central idea has to be so strong that everyone in the team, however big or small it may be, can really kind of sign on and understand, oh, this is what we're making, and they're not confused about what it is. And that can sort of take you through all the way through development and design and, and testing and marketing, to the players. I've seen so many game pictures and prototypes where it's just kind of, well, this is a platformer game, but it's just got monkeys instead of, lions or whatever. And I'm like, well, I mean, technically it's it's very well done, but I don't really know why it's special. And so I think people are getting better at this actually as games are becoming kind of more independent and bigger business. But yeah, I think it's just about like having a central idea that people can really latch onto and trying to visualize that pretty early.
Fantastic. That's actually a great recommendation to be able to have something that is easily explainable as a professor as well. One of the things that they always tell you is, you don't really understand something until you're able to explain it to a 6-year-old or whatever. It could be an exaggeration, but it definitely does help to really get the essence of what you want to explain. And if you can explain that very simply, very succinctly, you probably have a very good idea of that, what you actually want and what you're going to get from that. So that makes 100% sense in my mind. And after listening to these questions, to this sort of vibe in the podcast, is there somebody that comes to your mind, somebody that you would like to listen to answering these questions, like you, another guest for Professor Game?
Oh, it's a good question. Probably the most fun game that I played in the last year or so was Return of the Obra Dinn by Lucas Pope. He's based in Japan, and he's one of the best literally one-person indie game developers I've ever seen. It's just almost depressing how much this guy is able to accomplish on his own. I was playing this puzzle game, Return of the Obra Dinn, which has this brand new game mechanic I've never seen before in a game, and he executes it incredibly well. I'm playing it, it's got this amazing graphics, black and white graphics, and it's got this music that it's playing throughout. I was like, this music, it's great. Who made this music? The same guy who developed the game and did the art and wrote everything. So he's also a composer. I was just like, I wanted to throw my computer out the window. This is just like, it's too much. How is this guy able to do everything? It's just not fair. And he also made a game called Papers, Please, which probably a lot more people might have heard about as well.
Yeah.
So, that guy is probably one of the best game designers alive, if you ask me.
Beautiful. That sounds like a fantastic recommendation. And going on with those recommendations, is there a book that you would recommend an audience like this one? People who are interested in making games that do something beyond entertainment and, game design in general. Like, what would you recommend as a book? And again, it can do with game design or, fiction, nonfiction, whatever you want to go for.
Very lucky that I just finished, last month, a book called Life, A User's Manual by Georges Perec. And this guy is better known for being into Oulipo, which is a kind of style of rules-based fiction. And so he wrote a book without using the letter E. So he wrote an entire book without the letter E in it. Which, when I heard about that, I thought, well, it sounds kind of stupid. I mean, I was a little bit like this. I don't see what the point is. Now, in Life a User's Manual, this is a little bit different. He imagines a apartment building, and he divides it up into basically kind of 100 different spaces or 100 different rooms. And he tells the story of all the inhabitants throughout time by jumping to those different rooms. And the way he jumps to those different rooms is laying them out on the grid like a chessboard and jumping them between them in the manner of a chess knight, right? So kind of L-shaped moves. And it's not really a big deal. He doesn't really sort of mention this, in the book, but he's just trying to have fun with it. And when I started reading it, at first I was like, well, I don't really sort of understand what he's trying to do with this story. Is it just going to be 100 short stories? And then it sort of manages to transcend the kind of silliness of the premise, of all these kind of rules he set up for himself of telling these different stories in a sort of weird chess-based way. And to tell just a really beautiful set of stories actually about what life means, and these sort of games we set for ourselves. And it's got to be one of the best books I've read, the last few years. And it has its sort of game-like aspects, like I've said, but it's also just a really, really amazing piece of fiction.
Wow, that sounds really, really like an interesting book, especially to sort of get your mind into new things and, sort of thinking in a very different way. I love that, the concept in general. And what would you say in this world of creating games, what would you say is your superpower, that thing that you do at least better or a lot better than most other people?
The joke that I've said is I get bored of things way faster than other people, basically. So if I'm like playing a game and it's just boring at the start, I'll be like, screw this, I don't have the patience. And that's obviously a problem because you do need patience, for a lot of things. But I think that in a world where there are so many things competing for your attention and so many distractions, it is really important to be able to design something that can really grab people immediately and then, not lose them after 30 seconds or 3 minutes, but keep them. But you do need to grab them in the first place. And a lot of people don't really know how to do that because they think that because, they're interested in the thing because they created it, but they don't realize that other people just don't care about your new book. They're not interested in your new book. They're not interested in your new game. They're not interested in anything that you do. Right? It's not personal. It's just there's a million other things to do. And so, weirdly, like my superpower of just being bored of new things is helpful for creating things that maybe won't bore other people.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And you're talking about things boring you relatively quickly. So I'm guessing that there are very few things that actually catch your attention for a longer period. And I would like to know, what would you say is your favorite game, again, of today, of all time, of your childhood, whatever you want to go for? What would you say is that favorite game?
I mean, the game that I probably that was like most formative, that I spent the most time playing, was probably Civilization 2. I played that when I was a teenager, probably like for an entire summer or longer. And I wrote fan fiction about it. I got really involved in online communities about it. Civilization, obviously one of the best strategy games out there. Just a really beautiful balance of kind of rules and also freedom, and being able to layer your own stories on top of it, which is unusual for a strategy game, I think. And so I've really enjoyed that so much that I kind of have been reluctant to go back to Civilization 6, or the sort of the more recent civilizations, because I know that as soon as I start playing, then 6 hours of my life will just vanish immediately in the blink of an eye. And B, it probably won't measure up to how much I liked Civ 2. And that's not like the designer's fault. It's just, there's certain things you do when you're young, and the memory of that can, always sort of overpowers, the reality.
Absolutely. Or even worse, it can be better for you. You want to play it even more.
Yeah, exactly.
So thanks a lot, Adrian, for spending these minutes with us. I know you're very short of time, and you also have your 9-to-5 rule. So I just want to make sure if you have any final words, any final piece of advice for the engagers, please go ahead. Of course, where can we find you and your games and your company? Sort of the plug zone is definitely available until we say, well, of course, when we're done, it's going to be time to say game over.
Sure. So I'm on Twitter as Adrian Hon, and if you just search for Adrian Hon on Google, then you'll find all my stuff. I have a blog. Zombies Run is a game that is a sort of flagship game of my company, 6 to start. If you just type in Zombies Run into any app store or Play Store, then you'll find it. It's free to download. Give it a try. And yeah, I'm for my sins starting to think and write about games and gamification more. So hopefully in a year or two, there'll be a book about gamification coming out as well.
Wow, super exciting! Great news. If you wish, we can talk about it once it's about to launch. Once it's just launched, I'll be happy to discuss that as well if you wish. Anyways, thank you again for sharing your insights, your experience, all these things that you've shared with us today. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like Adrian from Zombies Run, then go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started in our email list. That way we will be in contact. You will be the first to know of any opportunities from Professor Game. You can write to me. We will be right there for you. And before you go on to your next mission have you subscribed and rated us using your favorite podcast app. It is completely for free, it costs you nothing, and helps us in our mission of reaching more engagers and changing the world with game-based solutions. So go ahead, subscribe and rate us on the app, and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.